You slide into a car, pull the door shut, and the outside world disappears behind glass. The seat warms beneath you. Your phone finds your location, draws a blue line across the screen, and calmly tells you where to turn, miss an exit, and it simply makes another road. Now strip all of that away. There is no road, no map, no compass, and no forecast, only a ridge ahead, and whatever waits. Beyond it, your shoes are stitched from hide. Your food must be found before sunset, and the dark ridge may hide water, strangers, predators, or absolutely nothing. One wrong valley does not cost you 20 minutes. It can cost everyone you love. So the question is simple. For nearly 2 million years, with no wheels, no written directions, and no idea what waited beyond the next horizon, how did your ancestors spread from Africa to almost every habitable corner of Earth? The first thing you have to understand is that almost nobody traveled the world. They moved camp. A hunting group followed animals into the next valley. A family shifted closer to water. A drought pushed one community toward unfamiliar grassland, while children grew up believing that new place had always been home. Then their children moved again. That sounds small. It was enormous. At Dmanisi, in the country of Georgia, archaeologists found evidence that early humans were living outside Africa between about 185 and 178 million years ago. They had reached the Caucasus before the wheel, agriculture, written language, or anything resembling a modern travel plan. 73 stone artifacts were found in securely dated layers there, evidence of repeated occupation rather than one lost wanderer. Think about that for a second. No one woke up and announced a mission to conquer Eurasia. Your ancestors probably moved toward the next useful patch of land, then the next over thousands of generations. Even a painfully slow expansion becomes gigantic with enough time. A model of the first settlement of Sahul, the ancient landmass joining Australia and New Guinea, estimated that people could spread at less than 1 kilometer per year and still occupy an entire continent within roughly 5,000 years. To one person, that is barely movement. To history, it is a tidal wave. But distance was not the hardest problem. The harder problem was knowing where distance would kill you. Here is what does not make sense until you think about it. Your ancestors did not move across the landscape like dots on an empty map. The map itself changed. Deserts became grasslands. Lakes appeared, survived for centuries, then vanished. Ice locked away ocean water and exposed coastlines that no longer exist. A route that fed your grandparents could become a graveyard by the time you had children. Around 95,000 to 86,000 years ago, the place now called the Nephrid Desert in Saudi Arabia was wetter and greener. At Al-Wusta, beside what was then a freshwater lake, researchers found a Homo sapiens finger bone more than 85,000 years old, along with stone tools and animals from a landscape fed by stronger monsoon rain. The desert had opened a door. Your ancestors learned to move when doors like that appeared. They followed rivers because rivers carried water, plants, fish, animals, and a visible line through confusing country. They favored the edges between forest and grassland, where shelters stood close to open hunting grounds. A 2024 study combined more than 24,000 dated archaeological records with genetic and climate data. Its likely migration routes repeatedly passed through warmer, wetter corridors, often near rivers, and the borders between wooded and open land. They did not have maps. Rain drew the roads. Of course, a good road means nothing if you starve halfway down it. You cannot carry months of food on your back while also carrying tools, hides, water, and a child. There are no supply stations ahead. There is no rescue behind you. So here's the part nobody tells you. The most valuable thing your ancestors carried was not stuff, it was knowledge. You needed to know which roots could be eaten raw, which had to be cooked, or stone broke into a sharp edge. When shellfish were exposed, how animal tracks changed near water, and which clouds meant rain rather than empty thunder. A tool could break. Skill could make another. At Majid Bibi, a rock shelter in northern Australia, people were present by about 65,000 years ago. Archaeologists found grinding stones, ground ochre, and ground edge axes. While later microscopic work showed that some of those stones had processed seeds and other plant foods, these were not helpless strangers surviving on one familiar meal. They were learning an unfamiliar continent and turning it into a pantry. What good is a packed bag when you do not understand the land? Your ancestors traveled light because the world carried most of their supplies. Wood became shelter. Stone became knives. Fibers became cord. Local plants became food or danger, but only if someone knew the difference. The real luggage was memory. Then, sooner or later, the ground ended. Standing on an ancient shore in Southeast Asia, you could walk no farther. Even when Ice Age sea levels were lower, the islands of Wallacea never formed one continuous land bridge to Sahul. Reaching Australia and New Guinea required multiple sea crossings, including at least one stretch approaching 100 kilometers. For decades, people imagined accidental castaways clinging to logs. The numbers make that explanation difficult. A 2019 ocean drift study found that random arrival was extremely unlikely unless large groups were repeatedly swept out to sea. But choosing when to leave and making even half a knot of forward progress dramatically raised the chance of success. The researchers concluded that humans could plan open sea voyages lasting several days by at least 50,000 years ago. But what do you steer toward when land disappears? You search for every clue the horizon offers. Cloud banks gathering over islands, birds leaving at dawn, and the steady push of wind and swell. None guarantees survival. Together, they make the blank horizon slightly less blank. And now the archaeology is becoming even more astonishing. At Liang Metenduno on Muna Island, part of Sulawesi, a hand stencil lies beneath mineral crust dated to at least 67,800 years ago. That hand was pressed against a cave wall deep inside Wallacea, along a likely northern route toward Sahul. Whoever left it belonged to a population that had already entered an island world where movement demanded watercraft. The boats rotted away. The people reached the other side. The ocean was one barrier. Ice was another. As your ancestors moved through northern Asia, cold did something strange. It closed some routes while creating others. So much water froze into glaciers that sea level fell, exposing Beringia, a vast region connecting Siberia and Alaska. Yet farther south, enormous ice sheets could block the interior like walls. How do you enter a continent wrapped in ice? The honest answer is that researchers still debate the exact path and timing. But a 2023 study of ice and ocean conditions found the Pacific coast was more likely than the inland corridor to provide movement opportunities between roughly 26,000 and 14,000 years ago. The coast may have offered a broken chain of beaches, marine food, and ice-free refuges, instead of one clear highway. Then there are the footprints. At White Sands in New Mexico, human tracks preserved beside an ancient lake have been dated to roughly 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. Because the first dates were challenged, researchers tested them again using land plant pollen and quartz grains. The ages held. Later lake studies added more support. Those footprints sit thousands of kilometers south of Beringia during the coldest part of the last ice age. Think about that. Somewhere behind those tracks were generations of decisions. When to move, which shoreline to follow, where to stop, which storm to wait out, and when to trust that the next place might be livable. Even the frozen world had seams. But none of these journeys worked if every small group had to rediscover everything alone. Here's the part nobody talks about. Who remembered the way? Travel was not a contest won by one fearless explorer. It was a social technology built from many ordinary roles. Scouts noticed water, elders remembered seasons, skilled makers repaired tools, and parents carried children who could not keep pace. Neighboring groups exchanged warnings, materials, partners, and stories. You can sometimes see those invisible connections in tiny objects. At the highland sites of Sehonhong and Melakane, in Lesotho, ostrich eggshell beads appeared even though ostriches did not live nearby. Chemical signatures in the shells showed that by about 33,000 years ago, beads were moving across networks spanning several 100 kilometers. A bead weighs almost nothing. The relationship behind it can save your life. When rain fails in your valley, another group may know where water remains. When your population becomes too small, distant relationships bring new partners. When one community discovers a better point, knot, crossing, or food source, social ties carry that discovery farther than one pair of feet ever could. Your ancestors did not carry one map. They built a map out of people. Distance came at them first, and they answered with generations. Drought erased the road, and they followed rain, rivers, animals, and green edges. Hunger emptied every pack, and they carried knowledge instead of warehouses. Ocean cut the land apart, and they built things that floated. Ice raised walls, and they searched for coastlines, valleys, and brief openings. Isolation threatened to erase what they knew, and they tied communities together across hundreds of kilometers. That is how the world was traveled, not by superheroes marching toward a known destination, but by ordinary people making one uncertain decision after another. A mother carried a sleeping child. An elder recognized a bend in the river. Someone tested a new plant. Someone watched birds vanish over the sea and wondered what they knew. The human map was drawn by people who rarely saw more than a tiny piece of it. So tomorrow, when you close the car door, feel the seat warm beneath you and watch that blue line appear on your phone. Remember what sits underneath it. Nearly 2 million years of footsteps, boats, camps, stories, wrong turns, and second chances. You inherited the whole world because they kept moving before they knew it was there.